Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into, well, these real workhorses of homeostasis, organs that you probably don't think about much unless something's gone wrong. The kidneys, you picture them, these dark red things about the size of maybe a big bar of soap. And you probably think, plumbing, waste disposal, and sure, they filter an incredible amount, something like 150 to 180 liters of blood plasma every day. But just focusing on the sanitation side really misses their genius. So our mission today is to get way beyond just filtration. We want to uncover these vital non-excretory roles. We're talking like sophisticated chemical engineering that controls blood pressure, fluid volume, even hormone production. How do these, frankly, quite small organs manage the purity and constancy of our entire internal world?
That really is the core question, because that constancy, the stability of our internal fluid, what physiologists sometimes call the milieu interieur, it's absolutely non-negotiable for life. The kidneys are, you could say, the ultimate homeostatic regulators. And what's so fascinating is how integrated they are. They're not just part of the urinary system. They're constantly talking to the nervous system, the endocrine system, the cardiovascular system.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're like the great systemic stabilizers.
Okay, let's unpack that. If their main job isn't just waste management, what are these other surprising regulatory gigs they have? What other hats are they wearing?
Well, we can point to three really key non-excretory functions, mostly managed through hormones or enzymes they release. First, there's the enzyme renin, which we'll definitely get into because it's crucial for blood pressure.
Okay.
Second, they release the hormone erythropoietin. And third, they handle the final activation of vitamin D.
Right. Those last two often get completely missed, don't they? I mean, if someone has severe chronic kidney disease, you often see symptoms like anemia and bone problems.
Exactly. And that links directly back.
Directly back to these hormones.
Absolutely. Take erythropoietin, or EPO. The kidney cells are constantly sensing the oxygen level in the blood passing through. If it's too low, maybe you're at high altitude or have lung issues or lost blood, they respond. They release EPO. And that hormone travels straight to the bone marrow and basically tells it, hey, ramp up red blood cell production now.
Okay. So it's the body's own sort of internal booster system for oxygen carrying.
Precisely. It makes sure you can carry enough oxygen even under stress.
Which explains why kidney failure might need blood transfusions or synthetic EPO. Makes sense. What about vitamin D? We usually link that to sunlight, right, on the skin.
Yeah, the skin gets the ball rolling. It produces an inactive form. Then the liver does a bit more processing. But it's the kidney cells that perform the final critical step. They convert it into its active hormonal form, calcitriol. And you absolutely need that active form because it dictates how much calcium you absorb from your food in your gut.
So if the kidneys aren't doing that final activation step,
then your body just can't pull enough calcium from your diet. Blood calcium can drop, bones can weaken. It shows just how systemic their influence is.
that really paints a much bigger picture. Okay, let's zoom in now on that blood pressure angle you mentioned. The body needs to constantly know its hydration level, right? Like a smart thermostat for water pressure. How does it sense when it needs to hold on to fluid, and how do the kidneys jump in?
Right. Maintaining hydration is all about balancing input and output. And the main hormone in charge of regulating how much water gets reabsorbed back is ADH, antidiuretic hormone. The whole process starts upstairs in the brain. You've got these incredibly sensitive cells in the hypothalamus called osmoreceptors.
Osmoreceptors. Okay.
Yeah, and they are very sensitive. If your blood volume drops, maybe you've been sweating a lot, or even if your plasma just gets a tiny bit too salty, like a solute increase of only 2 or 3%.
Wow, that's not much.
No. These osmoreceptors basically sound the alarm. They fire off signals to the posterior pituitary gland, which then releases ADH into the bloodstream. And the name tells you what it does. Antidiuretic means against the flow of urine.
Prevents urination, essentially.
Well, it reduces it dramatically. ADH travels down to the kidneys, specifically to the collecting ducts, and it makes the walls of those ducts much more permeable to water. It basically opens up water channels.
Letting water escape the filtrate.
Exactly. It causes the duct cells to pull much more water out of the forming urine and put it straight back into the bloodstream.
Okay, so the result is you conserve water, your blood volume goes up, blood pressure goes up, and you produce just a small amount of really concentrated urine.
That's the goal.
But hang on, if you're rapidly conserving water because things are too salty, isn't there a risk of like diluting everything else too much, messing up other electrolytes?
That's a really sharp point. The system does prioritize restoring volume first. It's a constant balancing act, but ADH is primarily a water regulator. If the root problem is a major electrolyte imbalance, ADH alone can't fix it. That's where aldosterone comes in, which we'll get to.
Okay.
But if the ADH system fails entirely, well, the consequences are pretty dramatic.
What happens then? What does a lack of ADH look like?
It causes a condition called diabetes insipidus.
Yeah.
It's completely different from the sugar diabetes, diabetes mellitus.
Right.
With diabetes insipidus, without ADH telling those collecting ducts to reclaim water, the kidneys just flush everything out. People produce enormous amounts of very dilute urine. I mean, it's not uncommon to see someone losing up to 25 liters a day.
25 liters, that's staggering.
It is. It's a catastrophic breakdown in communication between the brain and the kidney. Leads very quickly to severe dehydration, massive electrolyte imbalances. It's life-threatening.
Wow. That really highlights the power of just one hormone signal. Okay, so ADH helps keep volume up by saving water. But what if blood pressure itself drops really low? Do the kidneys have a more direct, maybe more powerful system to force pressure and volume back up quickly?
They absolutely do, and this is arguably their most potent tool for long-term blood pressure control. The Renin-angiotensin mechanism. It's triggered and managed by specialized cells right there in the kidney tubules, clustered together in what's called the juxtaglomerular apparatus, or a JG apparatus.
Okay, JG apparatus, what sets it off?
It's constantly monitoring the blood flowing into the kidney's filtering units in the afferent arteriole. If those JG cells detect that the pressure is too low, meaning there isn't enough force to filter the blood properly, they immediately release an enzyme called renin into the blood.
Renin, and you mentioned earlier, make sure we spell this right, R-E-N-I-N.
Correct, not R-E-N-N-I-N, which is a stomach enzyme for milk. This renin, R-E-N-I-N, is the starting gun.
Okay, the catalyst. It sets off a chain reaction that ultimately produces something called angiotensin II. And this is the molecule that really makes things happen, right? The heavy hitter.
That's a perfect way to put it. Angiotensin II is an extremely powerful chemical signal, and it acts in two main ways to get that systemic blood pressure back up fast. First, it's a potent vasoconstrictor. It directly targets the smooth muscle in the walls of arterioles all over your body.
Everywhere.
Pretty much everywhere. It makes them clamp down, constrict. This immediately increases peripheral resistance, the friction the blood encounters, and gives blood pressure an instant, significant boost.
Whoa, hold on. So the kidneys, trying to get their pressure up for filtering, end up making the heart work harder against constricted vessels everywhere else.
Yeah,
that sounds like, well, like an emergency fix that could cause problems long term if it's always on.
You've nailed it. It is primarily a short-term, life-saving response for situations like major bleeding or severe dehydration.
Yep.
And the problem you identified is exactly why chronic activation is linked to cardiovascular disease. It's precisely why many blood pressure medications, like ACE inhibitors, work by blocking the production or action of angiotensin II. They try to break that cycle of vasoconstriction.
Okay, that makes sense. So vasoconstriction is one action. What's the other?
The second major action of angiotensin II is hormonal. It triggers the release of other important hormones. Specifically, it stimulates the adrenal cortex gland sitting on top of the kidneys to release aldosterone, and it also reinforces the release of ADH from the pituitary, adding to that water retention effect.
Okay, so angiotensin II squeezes the pipes and calls in reinforcements like aldosterone and more ADH. It's really going all out to raise pressure and volume.
It is.
So where does aldosterone fit into the salt and water picture specifically? It seems like it's the one making the call on the salt.
Aldosterone is the primary regulator of sodium ion Na plus content in the fluid outside your cells, the extracellular fluid. Think of it like this. By the time the fluid reaches the final parts of the kidney tubule system, like the distal convoluted tubules and collecting ducts, about 80% of the useful stuff, including most of the sodium, has already been reabsorbed.
Right. Most of the work is done.
Aldosterone makes the final critical decision about much of that remaining sodium. When aldosterone levels are high, it signals the cells in those ducts to actively pump almost all the rest of the sodium out of the filtrate and back into the blood.
Actively pump it back.
Yes, using energy. And this involves a crucial trade-off. For pretty much every sodium ion, Na+, that gets reclaimed, a potassium ion, K+, has to be secreted into the filtrate to be excreted in urine.
Ah, so it's managing sodium and potassium balance at the same time.
Exactly. It's essential for keeping both Na+ and K+ levels where they need to be. And usually, chloride ions, Cl, just follow the sodium passively.
Okay, so aldosterone pulls back the salt. What about the water? You mentioned ADH handles water, but does aldosterone play a role too?
It does, indirectly but powerfully. This brings us to one of the most fundamental principles in physiology. Aldosterone's ultimate effect is to increase water reabsorption. How? Well, as all those sodium ions are actively pumped back into the blood, it makes the blood much saltier, much more concentrated right at that spot compared to the fluid left in the tubule.
Creates a gradient.
Precisely. And water, by the process of osmosis, is basically compelled to follow the salt. It moves passively from the tubule back into the blood to try and even out the concentration.
So the simple rule holds true.
Water follows salt. The more salt the kidney reclaims under aldosterone's command, the more water follows it back into the blood, increasing blood volume and, consequently, blood pressure.
It's just incredible how these systems interlock. Hormones from the brain, enzymes from the kidney, signals to the adrenals, pressure sensors, ion pumps, all coordinated just to manage salt and water balance and keep pressure stable. They really aren't just filters or trash collectors. They're incredibly sophisticated managers of pressure and hydration, constantly integrating all these signals.
Absolutely. And if you take that step back and look at the big picture, you immediately see why kidney health and cardiovascular health are so tightly linked. Think about the major risk factors for chronic kidney disease, things like hypertension, high blood pressure, and diabetes. Often, the disease starts because these very regulatory loops we've discussed start to fail or go into overdrive.
Like the hypertension example.
Right. High blood pressure damages the delicate blood vessels inside the kidney, hurting its ability to filter. But at the same time, if the kidney senses low pressure locally because of that damage, it might ramp up the renin-angiotensin system.
Which raises blood pressure further systemically.
Exactly. It can become a really damaging vicious cycle. It underscores how vital these finely tuned regulatory systems are.
So the kidneys are clearly masters of controlling pressure and fluids, using these hormones acting over minutes to hours. But they have another huge regulatory job too, right? Acid-base balance, pH levels.
That's correct. While your breathing can make very rapid minute-to-minute adjustments to blood pH by controlling CO2 levels, the kidneys are the heavy lifters for long-term pH stability. They have powerful mechanisms to either excrete excess acids or bases or conserve bicarbonate, which acts as a buffer. They can make much larger, more definitive corrections than the lungs can.
But they're slower, aren't they?
Much slower. Where the lungs adjust pH in minutes, the kidney's response can take hours or even days to fully kick in and correct an imbalance.
Which brings us to a final thought, maybe. Considering all this complexity, the rapid hormonal pressure controls, the slower but powerful pH regulation, what does it tell us about how stability is maintained in the body?
It raises an interesting question, doesn't it? If the slowest mechanism, the kidney's pH control, is ultimately the most potent one for maintaining long-term chemical balance in our internal environment, what does that imply about the different timescales needed for true systemic stability? Something for you to